that fundamental design line, it must be curved, and it's better to make it way too curved than not curved enough. Now, the parts, let's just draw a little torso here. And a little bit of limbs on there. Now, if we get that curve, that fundamental design line, that gesture, if we can feel that energy flowing down through, and we can keep going, that is the life of our composition. That is what makes our art come alive. I'm going to show you how to do that in tone, in clay, in color, in all the materials we may want to work. But that's the fundamental truth of it. And notice that the parts themselves, we could make the female hips here a bulging box. We could make it a mini skirt shape. We could make it a tipped over barrel shape. We could make it boxier, rounder. We could make it several shapes instead of just one shape. We have a bunch of choices on how we could make it two-dimensionally or three-dimensionally. We have a bunch of choices on exactly what simple shape to use, what structured choice we have. But we cannot take this curved gesture line that's curved in the hips and happens to curve through the waist and the rib cage and the neck and in the head. We cannot take that curve and fundamentally change the curve or destroy the curve. It would ruin the pose. It not only would be a different pose, it wouldn't be a believable pose. The figure cannot be straight that long. There might be a little section, the back of the arm might get stiff and straight, but then the forearm going into perspective, into the hand, would get curved again. So we cannot destroy that fundamental idea. So gesture is, here's the bad news. Gesture is by far the most important of the two ideas. It's the most important and it's the most difficult. That's a drag. We call that a drag in art. But if we understand the basic premise, we're just taking whatever part, whatever structure we want to render, because we realists love to render. We love to make things come out of the paper, go back in space, give that sense of mystery and mystique and atmosphere, give the sense of reality. You put the highlight on the nose, it pops off the page. We love all that stuff. All that rendering stuff will never work if we don't have the fundamental design curved to begin with. And what we will find is when we add the secondary and tertiary forms, as I showed you in the fingers and the hands, and when we add all the rendered tones and colors on top, they all also have to have a gesture to them. So that gesture will be ever present. If this were to be the beginning of a painting, and this is how I would draw a painting, I'd have my reference over here, and I would be looking at it, or whether it's my model or a computer screen with a photo shoot I put on, and I'd sketch it just like this, and then I'd start breaking down the light and shadow patterns, the foreground-background relationships, the secondary and tertiary forms. We'd build all that stuff on top of that, but it would start just like this, and as I put that final highlight, I don't have a nose, so maybe a highlight on the earlobe, that gesture would ring true past all that beautiful, wild detail, rendering technique, thickness of paint, color shifts, all that kind of stuff. It would still be there ringing true. So gesture is the fundamental design line. It is the long axis. It is the curved long axis. It's the watery, fluid, graceful, wave-like quality, not the contour. The contour will also have that wave-like quality. But the fundamental curve, I still have to show you how to find that. And I will before we finish here. We're starting to run out of time. So we'll get to that in a second. But gesture has to do all that stuff. And it starts with our long axis curve. Structure then is a choice of the parts. The structure, let me get another piece of paper here. The structure then, not as important, but still crucial and darn fun. It's really fun to make these things go into space and perspective and in form and that realism and even that fool your eye trompe-l'oeil we can do. It's fun stuff. So the structure is still crucial. We still need it. So let's define structure a little bit more. We said it's the parts or the forms. We said, for obvious reasons, we're going to make it the three-dimensional. That's why we say forms rather than the two-dimensional shapes, but it would apply to both choices. But we need to take a little bit farther. If we want to make the parts work for us, we want to have some rules to go by, because there's a billion parts and we got to go start somewhere. So I'd mentioned before the balls, the tubes, and the boxes, and every how-to book goes to those, and for good reasons. They're good, simple shapes, and we're going to use those too. We're going to define them a little bit more specifically, though, than that. What I want my structure to do, what I want the part I'm going to choose, and as I said before, for us it's a jointed part. So if I'm going to do the forearm, it's from wrist to elbow. We're just defining it that way because it's convenient, that's all. But I want those parts to have two criteria. I want them to be as simple as possible. If I can make it simple, I can take something that's difficult, say anatomy with all the Latin names, the thenar eminence and all that good stuff, phalanxes and all that stuff. Simplify it down. That can be great for my deadlines. If I happen to be an animator and I have to draw something 30,000 times, simplifying it's a great thing. Also, it gives me great possibilities for design. If I can simplify it, I can redesign and make it more heroic or more villainous, more emotional, more pertinent to the theme I have in my work. And so it gives me more control to make it simple. It makes it quick. It makes it understandable. I'm able to repeat it. I'm able to redesign it. I'm able to move it in space and animate it. It needs to be simple. But if it were just simple, then every drawing we ever did would just be this, just be a snowman drawing. Because there's nothing simpler than balls, less lines than any of these. But obviously we can't do that, because it needs to have another criteria. It has to be as simple as possible, but it also has to be characteristic of what we see. Simple yet characteristic. And that's kind of close to a head, maybe. It's vaguely ballpark, but that's no way close to a torso, waist, ribcage, waist, and pelvis there. So if we were Michelangelo and this was marble, we would have a tremendous amount of work to turn that into some believable beginnings of a sculpture, of a human figure. So what we want it to be is simple yet characteristic. What's the simplest possible shape I can choose, yet is the most characteristic of what I see? If I can make it simple yet characteristic, I can still easily redesign it. I can still get it down quickly. I can still animate it, repeat it, all those good things. But now it's going to help it fit better. If I have something that's simple yet characteristic, say a forearm, that's also going to, and if it's true to what I see, rather close to the finished product, it's going to fit better into the next simple form, the upper arm. If it's very crude, it's going to be a horrible fit, and I won't be sure that the next form is placed correctly or proportioned correctly, and the whole drawing will start to fall apart. What I did up at the head will have very little bearing on what happens with the feet, and I'll have a lot of corrections, and I'll have a lot of fixing to do. If I can make it very close to the finish, it's going to fit with the other forms, the other parts, the other structures, and the other gestures better. And it's going to be closer to a finish. It's going to be easier to finish off. Or if I'm stopped because the model takes a break, it was only a 5-minute pose, what I have there will still ring true to the finish, even though I wasn't able to put my beautiful rendering on top. So it's going to be closer to that finished idea. It's going to ring true when it's characteristic of what I see. It won't be generic, and so it won't be just anybody's forearm. It will be a muscular male forearm or a thin young woman's forearm or an overweight person's forearm. It'll be specific to that person. And so simple yet characteristic, it starts to become a portrait in a way of that person that we're drawing and not some generic formula. We're going to use basic ideas, but we're going to customize them to the person. So the simple shapes we draw for a car will vary depending on whether it's a Porsche or an Etzel. We want to do the same thing with the figure. We want to have simple yet characteristic shapes of what we see and of who we're drawing. So is it a heroic character, a villainous character, a young girl, young man? So we don't want to do the same shape every time. So I'm going to draw the gesture of the face, and then I'm going to draw a simple yet characteristic shape for the head, two-dimensional, and then three-dimensional. And I might have to add several shapes, several parts, several construction lines. We'll get into all the stuff on that. I might have to do quite a bit of work before I've drawn a pretty young girl with her hair up in a bun in a profile that I'm slightly underneath. I might have to put several marks there. I might have to spend a lot of time there before I've got enough structure off my gesture number 1 till I have enough structure that I'm confident of my next gesture. Gesture number 2 here is the neck. And so if I get it simple yet characteristic, it's going to fit together with the next form. It's going to ring true. Where exactly does that neck begin? It begins off the end of the chin. So if I'm very confident that I've drawn enough to know where that chin is, that that's her chin in that position, in that proportion, I'm going to be very confident of where to begin the neck and then all the way down eventually to the toes and get that figure well placed on the page. Simple yet characteristic. So that's going to be the rule of thumb for our structure.